Yeah, this is gonna need some context. Hold on. Nope. No. God, why isn't this working? Son of a... Screw it. Play it from the top. Dorohedoro is a lot of things, but easy to describe is not one of them. It's filled to bursting with nonsensical details and absurd twists and turns that shouldn't work as well as they do, and the kind of world that keeps finding stranger and stranger ways to enthrall and disgust, and I absolutely adore it for that. It's the most raw and unapologetically in-your-face embodiment of chaotic energy I've ever watched, and the further I fall into its many rabbit holes, the harder it is to get back out. And rather than simply accept my fate, I've decided to drag yous all down with me, because today, I want to talk about what I think makes Dorohedoro tick. Well, the anime at least. Sorry, manga readers. And I want to start with the fact that if you've been paying attention to the footage so far, you may notice that the art and animation has a very specific sense of... For anyone who may not know, Dorohedoro is an anime series directed by Yuichiro Hayashi, produced by MAPPA, and based on the manga series of the same name by Kyu Hayashida, set in Hole, a post-apocalyptic cityscape terrorized by sorcerers from another world who use doors to travel between worlds, and practice their magic on Hole's mortal inhabitants with terrifying results. It follows Kaiman, a lizard-headed amnesiac, and Nakaido, a restaurant owner with a dark secret, as they unravel Kaiman's mysterious past by hunting down, interrogating, and slaughtering every sorcerer they can find. However, after their attack on a young sorcerer called Ebisu was interrupted by one of their previous victims, Fujita, they catch the attention of En, the head of a magical crime family who, with the help of his cleaners, Shin and Noi, looks to put a swift end to their antics. There's a lot going on, and I think that much is clear in its presentation alone. It mixes and matches so many aesthetic ideas while unifying them under this grimdark tone in some really interesting ways. However, there are some details that I don't think blend as well as the show would like them to, specifically the 3D characters. Now, I'm usually the first person to give 3D in anime the benefit of the doubt, but in this case it's a mixed bag. While the models look nice enough, their animation can be stiff and lifeless, moving from pose to pose with little weight or momentum, and as a result, actively sands the edge off of the show's more intense moments. And more annoyingly, there seems to be little consistency in when it's used, beyond the logic of some characters being too much of a pain in the ass to do in 2D, which, given how much detail they have, is understandable. It'd probably be very easy to go insane if you had to dedicate entire days to drawing Kaiman scales over and 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 over. It's just jarring to see such awkward models standing against such an edge-riddled world. That said, I do still think the 3D has its moments. As lifeless as they can be, the models still convey a lot of emotion through their expressions and especially their body language. Cause as questionable as the movement between them is, the poses they linger on are pretty damn strong. There's a clear line of action that defines their gestures, and I think this is most clear in the fight scenes, where their animations hit their stride in more ways than one. They're quick and dirty, and the models hit every pose spot on, their bodies pushed to the extreme of believability, swaying with anticipation and secondary motion, and every kick, punch, and swing giving them the kind of dynamism and impact that honestly makes me shy away from the screen at times. Hell, even when the animation is less than stellar, I think it actually helps its comedy, as the goofiness of the CG's Jank ends up complementing the character's shenanigans. Also, there's this clip that I found on Sakugaburu that I don't know how to properly integrate into the script, but that I just want people to know exists. While Dorohedoro's CG may have its issues, I think it still has its bright spots. And for me, as the show goes on, it slowly blends back into the world, becoming another rough patch that adds to the makeshift look of its setting. And as questionable as the CG may be, that setting is something I just can't get enough of. The background art for the show is beautifully dense, especially for Hole, with skyscrapers and apartment blocks standing on top of each other in claustrophobic streets and alleys littered with junk, fighting for space in this suffocated landscape. The all-consuming grey din of its brick-and-mortar buildings haphazardly splashed with the bright hues of worn posters and graffiti, and the muted tones of rusting metal and rotting wood of old temples and ancient gateways. All rendered in excruciating detail, with every line adding that much more depth and texture to every scratch across the walls and every crack in the pavement. And every episode brings with it brand new places to explore, each with their own distinct feel, from the Renaissance atmosphere of the Magic World's architecture, to the dizzying lights of the Blue Night theme park, to the red heat radiating through the Sorcerer's prison, sitting on the very edge of hell itself. And I think, at least in part, the world's visual design can be attributed to the work of the show's art director and head of world visual design, Shinji Kimura, who's worked on the backgrounds for Akira and Angel's Egg and as an art director for Children of the Sea and Tekken Kinkri. And his attention to detail for cityscapes and urban centers is tangible in nearly every part of Dorohedoro's environmental design. But more than just how it looks, what I love about Dorohedoro's world is how it's built up. The show is constantly introducing wacky and over-the-top ideas into the story. From the yearly zombie apocalypse that arises in Whole every year that's been turned into a competition for those who help the priest with the, cleanup, to the baseball-based rivalry between the different wards of the hospital fought across a field riddled with impaled corpses and a bottomless pit, to the way things quickly switch gears into a literal cooking show to explain one sorcerer's uniquely quirky magic. And it all flows naturally from one insane talking point to the next. It's able to pack in so many unusual elements into its world in a way that only adds to the show's chaotic patchwork, and gives its setting so much more character by diving into all the wild sides of its multifaceted personality, which, considering what I've been spoiled on thanks to Twitter, might be a lot less metaphorical of a statement than you'd initially expect. Granted, the density of Dorohedoro's world can sometimes work to its detriment, as it leads to a lot of painfully expositional dialogue and conversations to explain it all, but even then it's still fascinating to learn about. And just like its world, so too is Dorohedoro's narrative packed with detail. It has some of the tightest pacing I've ever seen in a show, blasting through plot points so quickly that after only a few episodes it feels like it's transformed into an entirely different story, taking shots from its many proverbial Chekhov guns as quickly as they're introduced. Like, in the second episode, there's a quick line about how En's favorite restaurant has been infiltrated by spies. Then, a few minutes later, the other members of the family arrive to dinner in a show featuring a pair of shapeshifters who transform into oddly seductive versions of Kaiman and Nikaido, so everyone knows who they're looking for, before it's revealed that they are the spies, and after a brief scuffle, En magics them into mushrooms, inadvertently revealing to everyone that their mushroom-based meals are actually people!
Oh, how is it?
It varies from person to person.
So, to summarize, it sets up, hints at and pays off two twists with the spies and the food, catches the main antagonists up to speed on the main characters, jokes around with the main characters without actually using them, and reveals the big bad superpower, while also still having time left over for some shenanigans between them all, in the space of a few minutes. The show maintains this, or at least something near this, pace throughout, all the while whiplashing from comedy to drama to horror to action and bringing in new characters to follow and mysteries to unravel that up to density without bursting wide open as the ever-increasing complexity of its web of narrative through-lines constantly intersect and weave together in the most unexpected and sometimes accidental of ways. Dorohedoro crams an unbelievable amount of detail into its story without ever feeling bloated, and it's a careful balance I can't help but appreciate. There's just a lot of creativity bleeding through every part of the show, and it's something I think can even be seen in the things that'd be easy to overlook. Like the OP, a psychedelic experience of color and character acting filtered through the art of a buff girl making gyoza that doesn't really tell you anything about the show, but it sure makes you want to see what kind of show would have this kind of opening. The ED, which changes every couple of episodes to match wherever the narrative has currently stumbled into, not just in their visuals but also in their music, with each new ED being given a brand new song done by No Name to work with. And even in the soundtrack itself, which leans into so many different styles and genres. 1 minute playing the tunes of a Sicilian accordion and the next ripping into some heavy metal shreds. I think, I'm not that good with musical terminology. It's just pretty damn cool to see how much attention has been given to even some of the more innocuous details of its production. On a technical level, Dorohedoro's makeshift presentation and structure is dense with disparate details that click in ways I wouldn't have expected to work so well together, and I just can't get enough of it. And it uses this presentation to great effect when depicting its Dorohedoro can get very graphic, very quickly. It's what gives its dark fantasy its edge, but what I find interesting about it isn't the violence in itself, but how its characters react to it, because they don't. In fact, they actively indulge in it to such an extent that I think it's easy to argue that most of them are some level of villain, or at the very least, just some kind of asshole. Hell, the main characters are literally introduced this way. The series opens by framing Kaiman and Nikaido as a big bad monster and an evil femme fatale respectively, ganging up on and terrorizing what appears to be a pair of helpless young men, Fujita and Matsumura, before Kaiman slices the latter to literal pieces. It's the kind of introduction I'd expect for the main bad guys, the kind of dark criminals that need to be stopped before their reign of violence goes too far. And the only thing that clues me into the fact that these are actually the main characters is that the story keeps following them. And while it's easy to argue that there's some justification to it given how much suffering sorcerers bring to the people of Hole, including Kaiman himself, that context doesn't become clear until afterward. It only gets worse when later in the same episode they run into and attack Ebisu before realizing... And then this happens. Kaiman and Akaido's tendency toward violence leaves quite a villainous impression of their characters, and it's something that, even after getting to know and love their happy-go-lucky personalities, lingers throughout the series as the extremes they're willing to dive into becomes more and more clear. This muddled morality only gets messier when the N family, the actual antagonists of the series, comes into play, because for as sadistic, callous and maniacal as they can be, they're also quite endearing in their own ways. Fujita's riddled with insecurity, not just about his capabilities as a sorcerer, but also in his ability to be a good friend, something that's only heightened by his grief following Matsumura's death, leaving him feeling disconnected from those around him, and it's something I think, despite the very specific circumstances, can be quite relatable for many. As egocentric as N is, there are moments when his bravado cracks and reveals the humanity hiding underneath, whether it be the terror and dread he feels toward the things he doesn't understand, or the affection he has for those around him, especially Kikurage, the sorcerer cat that can revive the dead. Ebisu is... there! Doing her thing. Shin's calm and cool demeanor gives him a sense of professionalism that's hard not to appreciate, and it's only bolstered by his weird sense of ethics, refusing to use magic on those without it and having a deep-seated hatred for those who abuse it. Noi is unabashedly passionate about her work, to the point of getting genuinely excited at the prospect of meeting someone that can beat the shit out of her. And that upbeat enthusiasm is almost infectious. Also, she's got amazing hair and pretty red eyes. Also, she's huge and buff and can kick my ass and... Despite being the closest thing this show has to villains, it's hard for me not to at least be fond of Dorohedoro's quote-unquote bad guys. There's a grimdark complexity to Dorohedoro's characters that makes it hard to categorize them as fully good or bad. But considering the state of the world they're in, trying to do so may be pointless, since good intentions don't seem to amount to much in this setting. If anything, it tends to make things worse. Years ago, an anti-magic user militia was established to act as a bastion of defense for the residents of Hole, a way to protect them from the sorcerer's abuse, but it quickly devolved into something grotesque. They hunted sorcerers down through the streets, impaled and burned them alive, tortured them and beat them to bloody pulps, and butchered anyone who associated with them, including Shin's own father, a mortal resident of Hole who married and had a child with a sorcerer, for trying to protect his son after it was discovered that he turned out to be a sorcerer. Their good intentions paved the way for a bloodbath, as its members' ancient hatred for sorcerers made them all too happy to take it out on them in the most sadistic ways they could think of. Even something as simple as Kasukabe deciding to help Shin after he found him in the hospital was a small decision that in the moment seemed like a nice thing to do, but which only led to more chaos in its wake, as after helping him find his smoke veins and stitching his arms back on, Shin would go on to steal from a child, obliterate the anti-magic user militia, and use his powers to leave piles of body in his wake over the years after becoming a cleaner for N. Good intentions mean little in this world, as they very quickly corrupt the mentalities of those trying to do what they think is good, or lead to long-lasting chains of cause and effect that only bring more destruction in the long run. To me, Dorohedoro's characters are defined by this kind of grey morality, existing in this blurred space between hero and villain where such things have no solid definitions and good intentions mean nothing. But what I find fascinating is that it doesn't seem like something that stems from active selfishness or sadism on their part, it simply stems from apathy. In this world, violence and murder is just a means to an end, and the question of when to use it for its characters depends on whether or not it's justified. And for the audience, whether or not it's justified depends on whether or not the character using it is someone they're rooting for. And the subjective nature of those questions make them very complicated things to answer, especially in a setting that doesn't really care about who lives and who dies, and in which if you aren't willing to do everything you can to keep yourself alive, then you aren't going to last long. For these characters, it's nothing personal, it's just how things get done. But I think there's also an extra underlying cruelty to it, since the extent to which someone can start and end a fight in this world is heavily influenced by whether or not they have any. What I find interesting about Dorohedoro's magic is the particular way in which it explores the systemic issues that could arise from them. Because in many ways, being a sorcerer in the world of Dorohedoro comes with a lot of perks. On a very literal level, they have fucking magic. They can summon doors to travel between worlds. Some can heal otherwise fatal wounds or bring people back from the brink of, the fall into, or the pit that is death. Some can melt stone and steel or even level entire buildings with just a small puff of magic. Some can transform others into delicious food or into lizard or bug-based monstrosities with no realistic recourse for their victims to do anything about it. And there's few who would even dare try. The one organization that did was reduced to nothing shortly after running into the wrong sorcerer. Hell, some will just fuck with you for bad-mouthing them and hurting their ego, just like that bug sorcerer does to Nakaido for criticizing the clumsiness of his transformations. It only gets worse when you take into consideration the fact that many sorcerers literally worship devils, creatures whose entire existence is dedicated to making others suffer, and what's more, that some actively train to become devils themselves. They have unbelievable powers and abilities and actively use and abuse them on those that lack those same capabilities, knowing there's nothing their victims can do to really fight back and that they can get away with it scot-free. And I don't just mean this on an individual level, but also on a general one, as the very presence of their magic in itself pollutes whole, as basic weather patterns can completely knock people out of commission because of how much magic has seeped into the clouds. And remember that zombie apocalypse thing I mentioned in part 1? Well, it turns out that's a recent development in whole that's come about because of the way magic lingers and builds up in the ground to the point that now, once a year, it manages to bring the dead back to life.
いや、でもあり得る話だ。この街は俺たちの魔法の影響でいろんなことが起こる。とってもファンタジーな街ってことだ。ホラーの間違いでしょ。
The very presence of magic fucks things up, and the sorcerers who brought it don't really seem to care that much. Being a sorcerer in this world seems almost comparable to being rich or famous in real life. The former bringing with it the ability to get one's way through bribery and or having the kind of money that can buy a lifetime's worth of legal cases to ruin people if they don't take said bribe. And the latter letting one leverage the adoration they've garnered to make sure those who speak out against them aren't believed, or actively use those who look up to them to attack those who criticize them. In Dorohedoro, magic is the power upon which its society's structure is built, and it gives those with it an unbelievable advantage. Meanwhile, normal humans just don't have any of that. They don't have any special abilities or powers, they can't travel between worlds. Hell, considering the state Hull is in, they barely even have any quality of life. And despite the rumors that float around about how to become a sorcerer and the desperation with which some chase them, they can't gain magic. In this world, sorcerers are literally a different species from humans, which, while certainly a weird way to go about it, I think hits the point home perfectly. In this world, power isn't something you can earn, it's something you have to be lucky enough to be born with. Everyone else gets left behind. The divide between sorcerer and mortal life is even emphasized by the very design of their respective worlds. The magic user world, as is referred to, is this big, bright and ornate setting full of lush gardens and vibrant lights and Renaissance architecture carved with exquisite artistry and detail, a city that thrives amongst the chaos. And Hull is a ruin. It's not on the verge of collapse, it's already crumbled. The few remnants of life that linger scrounging amongst the rubble of the desolated cityscape to make a living out of what's left. And those who call it home only do so because they have no other choice. Having magic in Dorohedoro's world is a stroke of luck that comes with very tangible benefits that those without it just don't have access to. Which, as a side note, I guess is what makes Kaiman the perfect character to follow through it, since not only is he a victim of this world's magical shenanigans, but ironically, as a result, he's also become immune to its effects on a metaphorical and literal level. I mean, that and the fact that killing him isn't enough to make him die, so, you know. However, having magic doesn't immediately make life easy, or at least not as easy as one would imagine. There's a strong stigma within sorcerer society against those who are considered low level for having weak magic or powers that are relatively benign, and often leads to such sorcerers being beaten down and bullied, or in some cases being used by other sorcerers for magic practice, seeing them like mortals as being unable to fight back. But also, paradoxically, being a high level sorcerer can put one in just as much risk, as it marks them as a target for others to try and take advantage of, whether it be criminals looking to drain them of their magic to make illicit drugs, gangs of low-level sorcerers like the Cross-Eyes trying to take them down a peg or two, or even other powerful sorcerers hoping to ally themselves with as many high-level sorcerers as they can to maintain their status, and who are willing to use any means necessary to accomplish it. Life as a sorcerer is defined by the hierarchy that comes with it, one where you have to fight to the death just to stay where you are and exploit every little opening you can to climb up. Whether it be using drugs and surgery to boost your powers or going out of your way to become a devil, the literal gods of this world. And they're so deeply entrenched in that battle that they can't even let themselves wonder if it's worth climbing, lest they get pushed aside and left to rot while everyone else continues on. This world's magic creates a hierarchical social structure that reinforces itself through desperation, making life hell even for those with power. Dorohedoro's exploration of magic as a form of literal and figurative power and its wider ramifications leads to its world, to me, being one defined by the disparity that comes with it, where inequality runs rampant, those with power only care about securing more of it, and those without it are left to suffer. It's a fittingly depressing setting for a dark fantasy. But as dark as it can seem, I think there is a light at the end of its tunnel. For as gritty and nihilistic as Dorohedoro can be, I think the main through line that shines through it, all things considered, is oddly wholesome with how much it focuses on the idea of partners. On a literal level, having a partner is a pretty big thing in-world. It's a part of sorcerer society, whereby signing a contract with another sorcerer and having it put back inside each other's bodies through devil magic will bond the pair together, giving them the ability to sense the whereabouts and well-being of their partner, but also, depending on the circumstances, potentially the ability to manipulate the other. It's the kind of thing that's seen as standard amongst sorcerers, and the lack of which can lead to mockery, coming with the connotation that one is too weak or useless for anyone to even want to try partnering with them. However, on a figurative level, the idea of partnerships, or more generally, relationships and connections with others, to me seems like a big part of Dorohedoro's story. For as much chaos as Kasakabe's decision to help Shin when he was a kid is, it manages to swing back around when Shin decides to repay his debt by helping Kasakabe and the others escape to Hole after being kidnapped by En. En's criminal organization is constantly referred to as a family, and a big part of his motivations throughout the series revolve around trying to protect what little remains of it and getting revenge on those who've killed its members. And even more generally, it seems like the series pairs off its characters in one way or another, like Kaiman and Nikaido being the show's main duo, Shin and Noi working as En's cleaners, Ebisu and Fujita being the idiot youngsters tagging along, Risu and Aikawa being a pair of sorcerers just trying to get by, hell, even Vox? And Kasakabe click as the two doctors of the series. And also I guess Kasakabe and Johnson as a mad scientist and his adopted experiment. Or maybe it's Johnson and the cockroach as like bug buddies or something. I'm getting very lost in the weeds here, but you know what I mean. There's a strong focus throughout the series on its characters' relationships. And I think it's especially interesting to watch play out because of how each pairing seems to embody a different idea of what a relationship, whether romantic, familial, or friendly, can be. On one end of the spectrum, Ebisu and Fujita come across as a pair of kids who just don't know what they're doing. Fujita's too overwhelmed by his insecurity and grief to pay attention to anything, whilst Ebisu, following all the, trauma, ends up becoming such a scatterbrained airhead she's barely able to hold a coherent conversation, let alone properly express how she feels, unless someone else does it for her. It's a mess of a connection between them, and one that only really seems to be maintained mostly by proximity initially. But they slowly figure it out, as Ebisu's shit talk skews closer to sounding bantery rather than snide, and even doing her best to cheer Fujita up when he's down, and as Fujita starts to come out of his shell, coming to terms with Matsumura's death and finding some sense of prowess in what limited power he has. And as a result, becoming more comfortable opening up to and working with his new friend. They're a pair of young people trying to understand how they should work together, and as much of a disaster as it can be, it's something they're slowly getting a better handle on as time goes by. Meanwhile, all the way on the other side of the spectrum, En and the many people he ends up with seem to embody everything that can go wrong. En doesn't even really have relationships so much as he forces people to be with him, either by killing their owner and taking them in as his pet, or kidnapping them and making them sign a contract so he can take them in as his pet. All the while, he leaves the one person he properly partnered with, Choja, locked up in a tower all by himself for years, and only visits him when he needs something out of him. Though he does show some genuine sense of care here and there, his mentality is so steeped in an egocentric perspective that he doesn't even seem to realize how selfish he really is, which is only emphasized by how far he's willing to go to stroke said ego, what with all the mural paintings and statues, the glorification of his old restaurant, becoming a singer, and making a movie directed by himself, written by himself, starring himself, all about himself, and how epic he is. Or should I say, how NPick he is? Haha! I'll be here all week, folks! They won't let me leave. Someone call the police. En only cares about his relationships insofar as they benefit him, often to the detriment of the emotions and autonomy of those around him, embodying the kind of relationship that's all take and no give. It also explores the many ways in which a relationship can simply click, with Kaiman and Nikaido and Shin and Noi, and the nuances that come with even a seemingly perfect partnership. Their respective personalities are a perfect match, with each pair having similar interests and mentalities, even if expressed in very different ways, like their multi-layered obsession with food or their respective love of festival nights in each world. Their respective approaches to combat complement each other, with Noi's healing letting her and Shin go all out while Shin's curse brings it to a close, or how Kaiman's knife skills and Nikaido's hand-to-hand capabilities makes their two-pronged approach to fighting work so well. They each want the best for each other and help the other wherever they can, going so far as to risk their own lives if it means keeping the other safe, or sometimes risking their life to bring them back to their senses. Literally. Their relationships are built on mutual trust and understanding, But both also have their own strain, often brought about by some sense of tension from one of their members. Shin harbors guilt over Noi failing her devil training, since after being told not to use magic for a whole year, she ended up having to heal him after they were attacked just 3 days before her training was over, and it makes it hard for him to be as open with her as she is with him. Similarly, Nikaido keeps her status as a sorcerer a secret from Kaiman, unsure how he'd react if he ever found out and what it'd do to their friendship. And sure enough, when he does find out, it flips his whole world upside down, to the point that for a while he feels like he can't trust her anymore. Despite working so well, both partnerships have their problems that can potentially shatter them in seconds. And yet, they do everything they can to work through them. Shin and Noi still go to great lengths for each other throughout the series, in small and big ways, and Kaiman, despite his trust issues, still does everything he can to save Nikaido from En's control at the end of the series, and is more than willing to brush the whole sorcerer thing under the rug. Through it all, the bonds these characters make with each other drives them to resolve their problems, through thick and thin. It's their connections to those they care about that keeps them all moving forward. It's kinda hard to come to a proper conclusion about the point of Dorohedoro's story, since, for the anime at least, only about a third of it has been adapted, but I think there's still a nice takeaway from what has been explored. That what defines us isn't the cold and cruel world we're stuck in, or the way we personally navigate its cesspools of staggering inequality and violence, but by what we do to make it easier for someone else to wade through it, whether they be a friend, a relative, a partner in life or in business, or even a complete stranger. It's what we do for each other that makes us who we are, and as small of a saving grace as that is in Dorohedoro's grueling world, it's a hopeful message that, in this day and age, and especially in 2020, I can't help but appreciate. I think what makes Dorohedoro work so well is how its unusual creative decisions click together. Not because they flow seamlessly into one another, but because they're all so seemingly disconnected. It's a patchwork tale woven from disparate details, a makeshift collage of opposing ideas that blend into something greater than the sum of their parts, not in spite of the chaos they create, but because of it. And yeah, those are my thoughts. I gotta say, I'm getting a little worried about how long these World of videos are becoming, especially because the one I'm planning for Halloween is gonna potentially be 5-ish parts. And with how much of a struggle it was just to write 4 parts for this one, I'm sweating a little thinking about it. Then again, and not to give away too much about it, it is going to be about a movie, so maybe the shorter runtime there will make it easier to manage. Also, I have a couple of account updates to make. First, for anyone regularly checking my community posts, I have decided to cut down on the frequency of those, just because it's starting to become a pain to put them out weekly. Secondly, I recently changed my Twitter handle, so you can now find me there at TravenTweets, because branding. And thirdly, I recently set up an Instagram at TravenDraws, again, because branding, for art stuff. I've gone back into drawing quite a bit over the last year and wanted a place to post it, just for the fuck of it, but a lot of art-specific sites I looked into to do it, including ones I used to go onto, have gotten so very unbelievably horny, which I don't think is a problem, but that's just not the kind of thing I'm looking to make, so, you know. Granted, I'm also posting the art on Twitter, but I want to have an account that could just be for the art, instead of getting lost in everything else. So if you're curious about my doodling capabilities, go check it out. I already have a good few posts set up there. Anyway, hope yous are staying safe, keeping your distance, washing your hands, wearing a mask, and let me know what yous think. If yous agree, disagree, why your favorite part of Dorohedoro is, if you're also hoping for an eventual season 2, etc. And thanks for watching. If yous enjoyed this and want to see more, then check out my last video, where I ramble about some of my top things of summer 2020. Or watch me talk about Askeladd and what I think makes him work so well as a villain in Vinland Saga's Viking-drenched world. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and of course, subscribe to come fly at me. Hit the bell, save notified, follow me on Twitter for more updates, ramblings, and poor attempts at humor, follow me on Instagram for semi-regular art stuff, and hopefully, I'll see yous later.